The first ripple reached the shore before the sound did, a soft shiver that brushed the ranger's boots and made him pause mid-step. For a moment he thought the wind had shifted, but the air felt too still, too tight, as if the night itself held its breath. His pulse climbed before he understood why. Something on the lake moved, though nothing above the water had stirred. As he raised his lantern, the beam trembled across the surface, revealing faint shapes that should not have been there. A glow pressed up from beneath, like distant fires trapped under glass, forming rooftops and archways where a blank lake should be. He felt a pull in his chest, the old dread he tried to forget, warning him that the calm was a lie. The mirrored city seemed to breathe, each shimmer tracing lines that did not match the world he stood in. Then a figure in the reflection stepped forward, though no one walked the shore beside him. The lake whispered again, this time like a question he was never meant to hear. And as the glow widened, he wondered, who walked below the water when no city ever stood above it? The night settled thicker after the pulse faded, leaving the ranger unsure if the silence meant safety or something worse. The lake returned to its dark calm, but the memory of moving shapes clung to him like frost on skin. He walked the shore slowly, forcing his steps to remain steady as he searched for any sign the vision had left behind. The trees creaked in the still air, each sound sharper than it should be. He caught himself glancing at the water again, half expecting the glow to return in defiance of reason. Though the reflection city had vanished, its presence felt anchored in the world now, as if watching from a depth the eye could not penetrate. He whispered a question to the empty shoreline, seeking an answer that would not come, and the lake answered only with the soft lap of waves. He stopped near a fallen pine where the roots twisted like frozen serpents, the place where he often paused during his patrols. But tonight, the familiar path felt foreign. The ground seemed too soft, as if disturbed from below. A faint tremor buzzed through the soil, barely enough to shift dirt, yet enough to raise every hair along his arms. He knelt and pressed his hand to the earth, hoping to steady his thoughts, but instead felt the same slow pulse that moments earlier had come from the lake. Something beneath the world was stirring. His breath fogged before him, drifting upward like a warning signal. The forest, usually humming with distant creatures, stayed unnervingly still as if sharing his fear. He lifted his head, heart pounding, listening for anything that might explain the tremor. But there was nothing except the sense he was no longer alone. A soft rustle finally broke through the silence, drawing his gaze toward a narrow trail leading deeper into the woods. It was not the heavy step of an animal, nor the whisper of falling needles. This sound carried purpose, careful and deliberate. He rose slowly, gripping his lantern tighter, trying to see beyond the thick fog. The mist swirled as though disturbed by someone just out of sight. His heartbeat quickened as the noise repeated, closer now, too rhythmic to ignore. His instincts pulled him backward, telling him to retreat to the lake's edge where the ground felt real. Yet another part of him urged forward, to confirm whether the forest hid a threat or an answer. He took one step toward the trail, then another, each footfall measured against the growing uncertainty that waited in the dark. A final sound halted him, a soft clink like metal striking stone, drifting from somewhere deeper among the trees. It carried a strange familiarity, echoing memories he wished had faded long ago. He held his breath and listened again. The noise repeated, steady and intentional, as though someone was signaling across the forest. The fog shifted, revealing nothing but empty air. Yet, the metallic rhythm continued. He felt a cold certainty settle over him. Whatever moved in the forest knew he was there, and it wanted him to follow. He hesitated, torn between duty and fear. But the silence that followed the last clink was worse than the sound itself. It felt like a held breath, expectant and patient. With one final look toward the still lake, he stepped toward the trees, knowing the night would not let him rest. Dawn never truly warmed the forest, yet the ranger felt the chill deeper than usual as he traced the path back toward the lake. The night's questions clung to him like damp bark, each step reminding him of the glow beneath the water and the strange rhythm that called from the woods. He had hoped the sunrise would scatter his unease, but the light only revealed how unsettled everything had become. The trees leaned inward, their branches forming shapes that looked too deliberate, as if pointing him towards something he could not yet see. When he reached the ranger's post, he found an unfamiliar horse tethered beside the gate, its breath curling through the cold air. Someone waited inside. His grip tightened on the doorframe as he entered, preparing for anything, but not for the quiet voice that greeted him with the calm certainty of someone who had traveled far to find exactly this place. The visitor spoke with a certainty that unsettled him more than the night's visions. She described old rumors of a settlement that vanished without fire or flood, a place recorded in only a handful of crumbling texts. As she spoke, he felt the tremor from the previous night echo faintly beneath the floorboards, a reminder that her arrival was no coincidence. She asked for details of the lake, its depth, its history, its unusual quiet. He answered carefully, choosing words that kept the impossible at arm's length, but her sharp eyes seemed to catch every hesitation. She spread sketches across the table, maps marked with symbols he didn't recognize, and drawings of structures resembling those he saw in the reflection. The room felt too small for the truth they circled around. Finally, she looked up, her voice soft yet weighted. The lake was not hiding ruins. It was reflecting something that should not exist at all. They walked to the shoreline together in silence, the forest holding its breath, as if listening. The water looked ordinary in daylight, dull and gray beneath the overcast sky, a stark contradiction to the glowing city that pulsed there hours before. She knelt and studied the surface while he watched the tree line, unable to shake the feeling that something unseen followed their every movement. When she touched the water lightly with her fingertips, the faintest vibration rippled outward, mirroring the tremor he had felt in the earth. She murmured an observation he barely understood, something about the boundary between what is seen and what is remembered. Her words lingered like frost. He felt the weight of the lake's silence press into his chest, urging him to question everything he had dismissed as illusion. She stood slowly, her gaze fixed not on the water, but on the distant ruins half hidden by snow-dusted pines. They followed the narrow path toward the old ruins, a place few visited and fewer spoke of. As they approached, broken stones jutted from the soil like the ribs of something long buried. He had passed these ruins many times, never giving them more than a cautious glance, yet now they felt alive with meaning he had failed to notice. She traced her hand along the carvings etched into the stone, symbols worn by centuries of wind and ice. A low hum rose beneath their feet, barely perceptible yet unmistakably real. She whispered a translation. Something about watchers, crossings, and a city beneath dawn. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of discovery. He felt the air shift, colder now, like the first breath before a storm. Whatever the lake revealed last night was connected to these ruins, and the earth itself seemed to pulse in agreement. The wind shifted sharply, carrying a scent of cold ash from the direction of the lake. He turned at once, sensing more than hearing the disturbance. The trees swayed, though the air stayed still, and a faint glimmer flickered across the water's surface, too brief to form the full reflection, yet enough to confirm the city waited just beneath. Alara hurried back toward the shore, her steps quickening with the urgency of someone who finally sees proof of a theory long doubted. He followed, his heart pounding as the tremor beneath the ground strengthened. When they reached the water, the surface darkened as if something passed beneath it, circling them. Elira whispered that the reflection was reacting to their presence, responding like a living thing. He felt the truth settle like a weight across his shoulders. The lake was no longer merely echoing another world. It was listening. Night returned with a weight that felt intentional, as though the sky lowered itself to press against the lake and forest alike. The ranger moved with slow, steady breaths, each step reminding him of the tremor that had followed him all day. The historian stayed close, her quiet focus sharpening the uneasy calm that stretched between the trees. When they reached the shoreline, the water already shimmered with a faint glow, like an ember waiting to flare. The reflection city stirred before their eyes, its towers rising in soft ripples that made the surface look like living glass. He felt a twist in his chest as shadows within the reflection shifted to face them, mirroring movements they had not yet made. The air tightened as if the night prepared to speak. Then the water brightened sharply, revealing a street in the reflection where a lone silhouette paused, staring upward as if aware of their presence far above. The ranger stepped closer, careful not to break the fragile stillness that surrounded the glowing water. Beneath the surface, the reflected street curved around a corner, and as the light shifted, two pale figures walked past each other without truly seeing. Their movements repeated, looping like a memory stuck between breaths. The historian whispered that the reflection was no longer showing a city at rest, but one caught in some unfinished moment. Her words felt too large, too heavy, and he found himself gripping the lantern until his knuckles ached. The figures changed direction suddenly, turning toward the surface as if hearing a distant call. He froze, breath lodged in his throat. Their eyes lifted, not toward the reflection, but toward him, as though the barrier between them had thinned to its breaking point. The lake pulsed once, bright enough to sting his vision. As the afterglow faded, he staggered back, unable to pull his gaze away from the flickering shapes beneath the surface. The historian steadied him with a quick gesture, but her eyes did not leave the water. The reflected street shimmered again, shifting into an angle that should not have been possible. The buildings rotated slightly, as if the world below was turning to face them. He felt the earth tremble under his boots, a faint vibration climbing through the soil into his bones. A new shadow appeared, tall, deliberate, and moving with a purpose that made the air tighten around them. The historian whispered that the reflection city was responding to their presence more clearly now, like something awakening after a long slumber. He swallowed hard, trying to ignore the cold certainty creeping through him. Whatever stirred beneath the lake was no longer content with being watched. The tall shadow grew clearer, separating itself from the shimmering skyline as though crossing from one place to another. The ranger felt the same cold dread he had sensed the night before, but this time it came sharper, carrying a familiarity he wished he could deny. The historian murmured that the figure did not match any known style or record of the vanished civilization. Its posture suggested awareness, perhaps even intent. He held his breath as the figure in the reflection paused directly beneath them. Then, without warning, it stepped closer, closing the distance between its world and theirs. The lake's surface tightened, forming delicate ripples like stretched glass. A faint whisper rose from the depths, too soft to understand, yet strong enough to make the ranger's heart jump. For the first time, he wondered whether the reflection city watched, not out of curiosity, but hunger. The moment broke with a sudden crack beneath the lake, a sharp sound that echoed across the shoreline like splintering stone. The entire reflection warped, twisting into a spiral of light and shadow before snapping back into place. He stumbled forward instinctively, fearing the surface would shatter, but it held firm. The historian clutched her satchel, murmuring about boundaries weakening, about worlds brushing too closely. Her voice trembled, and it wasn't from the cold. The tall figure in the reflection had vanished, leaving only faint glimmers that drifted like embers beneath water. The ranger felt a pressure behind his eyes, a warning he couldn't ignore. The night no longer felt like a veil, but a door slightly open. He knew the next time the reflection city stirred, something might cross through, and he feared he would not be ready when it did. The night arrived early, swallowing the last trace of daylight before either of them reached the lake. The ranger felt the weight of the darkness settle against his shoulders, heavier than anything he had carried before. The historian walked beside him, her silence sharp with thought, both of them listening for the tremor that now came like a heartbeat beneath the forest floor. When they reached the water, the surface shone with a faint silver glow, already forming outlines of the reflection city. But tonight something was different. A low, distant cry echoed from the tree line, soft, haunting, and unmistakably unnatural. He felt the sound coil through the air like cold breath. Then the glow beneath the water shifted, revealing a pale shape moving between the reflected towers. The figure walked with slow grace, antlers shimmering like frost. He knew without speaking that the thing they feared had returned, not as a shadow this time, but as a presence. The cry faded into the treetops, but the air held the vibration long after the sound disappeared. The ranger stepped closer to the water, feeling the cold deepen as if the lake exhaled. The historian murmured that this was no simple apparition, her voice delicate with awe and dread. She recognized symbols on the ruins that hinted at a guardian, something meant to watch over boundaries and punish those who disturbed them. As the reflection brightened, the stag lifted its head, and though its face remained hidden beneath its veil of pale shimmer, he felt its attention like an icy blade. He swallowed hard, fighting the urge to retreat. The stag's movement was slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. The water trembled, and the pulsing glow beneath the surface began to echo the rhythm of the earth under their feet. It was no longer only watching. It was preparing. The stag began to move through the reflection city, and with each step the buildings shifted around it like they were bending to its will. The ranger felt the earth respond, a subtle sway that made his breath catch. The historian whispered that the stag was not confined to the reflection. It existed between both worlds, crossing through memory and stone. As she spoke, a faint glow flickered behind them among the trees. He turned sharply, lantern raised, catching a glimpse of pale shapes moving through the mist. They were not animals. They moved like people, but too slowly, too fluidly. Their silhouettes stretched by shadows. The stag's reflection pulsed once more, and the figures in the tree line froze. A cold certainty settled over him. Whatever followed them from the reflection was learning the forest's shape. The boundary between worlds was thinning, and both sides were beginning to bleed together. A wind pushed through the clearing, carrying the thick scent of cold stone and damp earth. The reflected city flickered, and for a moment the ranger saw flames rising from its towers, silent fires, bright and motionless, like memories trapped in glass. The historian gasped softly, recognizing the scene from one of her sketches, the final night of the vanished settlement. She whispered that the city beneath the water was not alive, but repeating a moment of collapse, an echo of a disaster that shaped the world above. But the stag moved freely through it, untouched by the looping destruction. As the fires brightened, the lake darkened, shadows rising like smoke against the surface. The ranger stepped closer, gripped by a painful mix of terror and curiosity. The stag turned toward them, pausing as if inviting a question neither of them wanted to ask aloud. The flames in the reflection surged, lighting the underside of the water with a violent shimmer. The ranger flinched as the heatless light washed over him. The historian covered her mouth, whispering that the cycle of destruction was tightening, and the boundary between worlds was nearly undone. The stag lowered its head, its antlers catching the reflected fire like molten metal. The pulse beneath the ground deepened, shaking pine needles loose from the branches above. He felt the tremor travel up his legs, into his chest, settling behind his ribs like a warning lodged in bone. The reflected city twisted sharply, its towers bending sideways until the vision fractured, splitting into shards of light. He grabbed the historian's arm as the lake rippled outward in a deep, thunderous wave. The stag stepped forward in the reflection, closer than ever before. The night felt moments away from breaking. The night pressed against the forest, with a heaviness that made every breath feel measured. The ranger and the historian moved along the shoreline, their steps careful, as though each footfall risked cracking something fragile beneath the world. The lake no longer waited for darkness to settle. Its glow pulsed restlessly, stretching long fingers of light across the stones. He felt the pull from the water like a quiet summons, a call that had been growing since the first reflection appeared. She whispered that the boundary was unraveling, that the city below no longer felt distant, but close enough to touch. When they reached the flattest part of the shore, the water stiffened, smoothing until it resembled polished glass. His pulse hammered as he realized the lake was preparing a path. The surface brightened once more, not showing the reflection city, but revealing a single illuminated street waiting like a door left open for them both. He reached out first, fingers trembling as they hovered above the strange surface. There was no cold, no splash, only a faint vibration like touching the skin of a drum. The historian urged him to test it further, her voice hushed, as though afraid to awaken something listening beneath. With a slow breath, he pressed his palm down and felt the impossible give of solid water. She knelt beside him, studying the way the ripples spread evenly without breaking. It was not water anymore. It was a threshold. She placed her hand beside his, and together they pressed down until the surface accepted their weight. The world above them dimmed as though the sky itself recoiled. He exchanged a glance with her, recognizing the risk in her eyes, but also the resolve. They stood, stepped forward once, and the lake held them. The first step into the unseen city felt like stepping into someone else's memory. They walked across the impossible surface, each step sending faint ripples that faded into the glow beneath. The reflection city unfolded with startling clarity as they drew closer, its towers rising like frozen lanterns, its streets captured in silent motion. He felt a strange heaviness settle on his shoulders, as though the air inside this space had been waiting ages for someone to breathe it again. The historian moved slowly, examining every detail, her eyes wide with wonder and dread. As they reached the threshold where water met reflection, the world shifted. Color drained from the sky, the lake vanished beneath their feet, and they found themselves standing on a silent street made of pale stone. The buildings leaned inward, their windows filled with motionless figures of light. Time felt stretched thin, and every sound seemed swallowed before it formed. He whispered a single thought. They were no longer looking at the echo. They were inside it. The silence of the reflection city pressed around them like fog, thick and strangely warm. As they walked deeper, the figures inside the windows began to shift, slow, repeated movements that looped endlessly, like fragments of memory struggling to stay alive. The historian whispered that they were witnessing the final moments before the city's fall, preserved not in stone but in endless repetition. He felt the weight of countless eyes that didn't truly see yet somehow recognized their presence. A distant rumble passed underfoot, the same pulse that had haunted the forest, but amplified here until it echoed through his ribs. They turned a corner and found a wide plaza where the air shimmered with faint orange light. Above them, an unfinished fire burned silently, its flames frozen mid-rise, and beneath that motionless blaze stood footprints leading away, fresh ones, too defined to belong to any looping memory. Someone else had crossed before them. They followed the footprints carefully, each one confirming that whatever moved through this city was not bound by the loops trapping the others. The trail led toward a broken archway at the edge of the plaza, where the air felt colder, heavier, as if holding something back. The ranger felt the tremor beneath his feet deepen, merging with a distant rhythmic beat that echoed through the walls. The historian whispered that they were nearing the core of the collapse, the moment that shaped everything. As they passed through the archway, the world dimmed, pulling them into a narrow corridor of shadow. Ahead, a soft glow flickered gently. The glow of antlers. His breath caught. The stag stood at the far end of the corridor, perfectly still, as though expecting them. I shriek. Doorway. Its presence filled the space with silent authority. Its head tilted slightly, inviting them with a calm that felt more threatening than any roar. The path forward was no longer a choice, but an inevitability. The corridor tightened around them as they stepped forward, each breath turning the air heavier and colder. The stag did not move, yet its presence filled every crack in the stone, as if the entire city quieted to listen. The ranger felt the tremor rise through the floor like a warning, echoing the pulse he had followed since the first night by the lake. The historian whispered that this place was the heart of the collapse, the point where memory and ruin converged. As they approached, the stag tilted its head, and the corridor brightened with a soft, ghostly glow. He felt its gaze pierce through silence, not with malice, but with an ancient authority that demanded understanding. The air rippled, bending around the creature as though it existed in more than one place at once. The ranger sensed that foundations of the city, the lake, and even the world above were shifting, all bound to the presence waiting before them. The stag moved at last, one slow step that resonated through the entire corridor. The city responded instantly, its frozen windows flickering as the looping figures inside shifted into new positions. The historian gasped, realizing the cycle itself was breaking. The ranger braced himself, knowing something irreversible had begun. The stag lowered its head, and the world bent around them, the air pulling in like a breath before a storm. A deep rumble surged through the stone, rising toward a pitch that made the walls vibrate. The reflection city was awakening from its repeating memory, and the moment of its collapse was returning in full force. As the tremor intensified, dust drifted from the ceiling, and the floor shuddered beneath their feet. A distant roar echoed, silent, yet felt like the last breath of a world that had died once already and was preparing to die again. The corridor split open without warning, stone dissolving into cascading shards of light that fell away like sand. They stumbled into a vast hall, an impossible expanse suspended between the city's memory and its ruin. Towers cracked and reformed in endless cycles, and figures of pale light ran past them in silent panic, repeating their final moments with increasing urgency. The historian clutched his arm, whispering that they were witnessing the exact second the city failed, looping faster now, pressing toward something final. The stag appeared at the center of the hall, its form solid here in a way it never seemed beside the lake. The ranger felt a deep truth settle over him. The stag was not causing the collapse. It was guarding what remained of a world shattered long ago. Yet its presence signaled something else too. Something he sensed in the tremors rising like a heartbeat. The collapse was coming again. And this time the echoed world was not collapsing alone. The tremor surged again, this time strong enough to knock them both to their knees. The city screamed without sound, fires blooming, towers twisting as if made of liquid stone. The historian shouted that the reflection and the real lake were merging, their boundaries collapsing just as the city once had. He felt the pressure in his head intensify, pounding with the rhythm of the shaking world. The stag turned its veiled face toward him, its antlers blazing with sharp, cold fire. The hall distorted, folding inward, as if drawn toward the creature's presence. He understood then that the stag was not merely a guardian, but a barrier, one that was failing. The lake's surface above them felt closer, as though both worlds pressed into one place. The stag lowered its head, and the final collapse began to gather, pulling the hall into a spiral of light through which escape seemed impossible. Light shattered across the hall as the final tremor roared through the collapsing world. The ranger lunged toward the historian, shielding her as the ground split open beneath them. Through the cracks he saw flashes of the lake above, shimmering like a fractured mirror. The stag took one last step, standing at the heart of the upheaval, its presence steady amid the chaos. The ranger felt the truth hit him with a force stronger than the tremors. The collapse was not meant to consume them. It was meant to force a choice. The stag's antlers dimmed, flickering as though waiting for his decision. The historian grabbed his hand, her gaze fixed on him as if she sensed the weight of the moment. The The spiraling hall narrowed to a single point of light. The world around them twisted toward that point, pulling everything, city, lake, and sky, into a single breathless instant. And in that instant, he understood what the stag demanded. One world could survive this merging, and one could not. The light closed fully around them, swallowing sound and shape, until only a thin breath of existence remained. Then, slowly, the world unfolded again, not as the reflection city, nor as the forested shore, but as something caught painfully between. The ranger felt the ground solidify under his feet, though it rippled like water with every heartbeat. The historian clung to his arm, her breath unsteady as she stared at the collapsing horizon, where towers of pale stone bled into the silhouettes of pines. The air shimmered with fragments of two realities grinding against each other. Far ahead, the stag stood calm amid the shifting chaos, its antlers dimmed to a soft glow, waiting. The ranger sensed that the decision pressed upon him had followed him into this final place. Nothing here belonged to either world completely, and the merging would not stop on its own. If he stepped toward the forest shadows, the reflection would fade. If he stepped toward the collapsing city, the real world would give way. He inhaled slowly, realizing this place existed for his choice alone. The space around them flexed like a living breath, pulling the city closer, then pushing it away as though undecided. The historian whispered that the world above had no defenses against a merging this violent. If the reflection city surfaced fully, nothing would remain unchanged. Her voice trembled, though she tried to steady it, urging him to choose the side anchored in the living world. He felt the truth of her words, but beneath them lay a quieter understanding. If the reflection city collapsed again without release, its echo would return, repeating the cycle, pulling more of the world with it. He stepped forward, and the ground responded, lifting shards of both realities into the air as if weighing his movement. The stag's head tilted, acknowledging the shift. The ranger felt something inside him tighten, not with fear but with the clarity of consequence. Saving one world meant letting the other finally rest, even if rest meant erasure. The world shook, as if recognizing the turn in his resolve. Towers in the distance cracked, dissolving upward into trails of white dust. Pines warped into narrow stone pillars before snapping back into trees again. He felt the weight of every trembling moment he had witnessed, every silent figure, every frozen fire, press against his chest. The historian stepped beside him, placing her hand on his shoulder, not to sway him but to stand with him in whatever choice remained. Her calm steadied him, reminding him that choices meant little without someone to bear their consequences alongside you. The stag's glow brightened softly, not urging, but acknowledging. He exhaled, feeling the air shift with newfound purpose. The world's trembling eased just slightly, waiting, listening. The ranger realized the collapse had not yet claimed everything. The final moment still lay just ahead, shaped by a single decision he had avoided for too long. He stepped toward the forest's outline, toward the world of breath, soil, and mortal time. With that motion, the reflection city trembled violently, its frozen fires scattering into flickers that drifted upward like dying stars. The stag bowed its head, acknowledging the passing of one world into memory. The historian whispered a soft prayer for the city's final rest. The ground quivered beneath them, and the city began folding inward, collapsing not with violence but with a weary sigh. Figures of pale light dissolved mid-motion, freed from their endless loop. The air warmed slightly, and he felt the lake above them grow calmer, as though the strain of holding two realities had finally eased. As the city dimmed into a single ribbon of light, the stag turned away, stepping into the fading glow as though walking along the final breath of a forgotten story. Its antlers flickered once more before darkness claimed them. Light washed over everything in a soft wave, and then the world broke apart, falling, folding, twisting, until the ranger felt solid earth beneath his feet once more. The night air returned, cold but familiar, heavy with the scent of pine and lake water. Beside him, the historian steadied herself, blinking at the quiet shoreline as though unsure it was real. The lake lay still, its surface calm and empty, no glow pulsing beneath, no city hidden in its depths. The ranger felt a strange ache, a mixture of grief and relief, knowing the reflection city had finally been allowed to rest. The forest around them stood unchanged, yet the silence felt different, cleaner, as though the world had exhaled after holding its breath for centuries. He lifted his lantern, watching the soft light ripple across the water. For the first time since the visions began, nothing answered back. Yet, as the wind shifted, a faint shimmer brushed the lake's edge. Not a city, not a figure, but a single glint, like an echo, saying its final goodbye.